Assalamu alaikum. This is Yasmin Mogahed, and you're listening to Serenity, streaming live on One Legacy Radio. Today, I actually wanted to start out the show by sharing an experience that I had yesterday. In fact, I had gone up to Big Bear, and for those of you who are from California, you know that the drive up to Big Bear is pretty much amazing. So is the drive back down. Big Bear is up in the mountains, and I think the San Bernardino Mountains. And basically, it's just like it's totally breathtaking. I mean, when you see what you're seeing, you almost feel like it isn't real. Because it's so beautiful. And one of the things that I was thinking about, so some reflections that I was having, which relate to today's topic, and that topic is pitfalls on the path to God. But one of the things that I reflected about, or that I was realizing when I was driving and seeing this amazing beauty, is that I actually, on my way back down, I had to be somewhere. So I had a talk at Cal Poly, and I needed to be there at a certain time, and there was I had to fight. I knew I was going to probably have to fight traffic and crazy drivers and that kind of thing, because I live in California. People drive really, really aggressively here. I'm not used to it. For example, if you put on your signal, that means speed up to everyone behind you. It's really annoying. So anyway, you have to be really aggressive just to change lanes. But anyhow, actually, on my way to Cal Poly, I was trying to change lanes, and so I put on my signal, and that meant that the lady behind me needed to speed up. So that meant I actually missed my exit, which was a big deal. So it ended up I was just thinking how one little thing can just change, just the fact that she needed to speed up, it probably added 45 minutes for me or something, maybe 30, but it was quite a bit of time because I lost that whole highway. And then anyway, the idea here was that I had somewhere that I needed to be on my way down. And so as I was driving down, and it's like a very curvy road, and basically, if you can imagine it, it's pretty narrow. It's just it's usually just one lane on one side, and then the opposite side is going the opposite direction, and it's pretty narrow. And then on your side, on the side of you are these mountains, and they're just breathtaking. And so here you are driving, and then sometimes you have people behind you who want to kill you because you're not going fast enough. And so you have to sort of balance all these different things. But as you're driving, it is very difficult not to look to your side, right? Because it's gorgeous, right? There's all this beauty. And I was thinking about it as I was driving that, on this path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we encounter things on our path which are very beautiful. We encounter the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is very beautiful. And yet, if you think about it as, if you go back to the analogy of when I'm driving, as I'm driving, if I spend too long looking at the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or my focus shifts from the road, and instead it shifts for too long to the creation, in this case, the mountains, what's going to happen to me? Well, what's going to happen to me is I'm going to crash, because I have to stay focused. I can only basically glimpse at the side because I have to stay focused on the road, and I have to stay focused on where I'm going. And I was thinking about it, how, on our path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we do encounter different things which might capture our attention or capture our hearts. And those are all in the creation of Allah, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made His creation beautiful. And sometimes those things happen to be, in this case, it might be, this beautiful scene. It also could be, in some cases, it might be another human being. In some cases, it might be, the different gifts that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us. So our spouses or our families, our children, sometimes it's our careers, or, where we want to get in life. All of these things, sometimes they capture our attention. And the lesson here is that if we shift our focus away from our actual end, our actual purpose, and we spend too long looking at those things, we end up crashing, and we end up getting off course from where we need to go. And then the other thing I was thinking is how badly I wanted to stop like on my way down, I wanted to stop at like every stop. They have some places where you can pull over and just like vista points and stuff where you can look. And it was just like, I really wanted to keep stopping, but I had somewhere to be. So it was like we want, again, this extended metaphor, we want, as we go through this path in life, there will be things that we want to shift our focus to, and we want to, spend too much time at that stop. But the lesson here is that we can't, because we have somewhere to be. And no matter how much we love that thing or how much we are impressed with the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, at the end of the day, it's just a stop. It's just a glimpse that we can have of it. We need to stay on our course, in order to get where we need to be, in life and in the hereafter. So it was just a lot of different types of reflections, in terms of like, what is our path? And then I also, want to talk a little bit about what are some of the pitfalls that we sometimes fall into on this path. And I think that one of them is that we do get distracted. We get distracted by the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we sometimes stay too long in one spot, and we think that maybe this is our destination, or maybe this is where we need to stop. And the lesson is always, again and again and again, that you need to keep going, and that what you seek is still beyond, and that the end point, in my case, was I needed to get to 𝐁𝐎𝐒 𝐈𝐍𝐶𝐒. And so that was, I couldn't stop for too long. And similarly, even when the Prophet ﷺ, he gave the analogy of this life in general, as being just a stop in his path. And he said that I'm like a traveler who's going through this life, and I get to the shade of a tree, and I stop for a while, and then I continue my journey. And so this is like the way that he sees, and the way he's taught us to see all of this entire dunya. Our journey through this dunya is just like a traveler who stops for a while. And on this path, one of the things that happens, and one of the pitfalls that we do fall into, I think, even those who are taking this path, who want to make Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala their priority and want to start on this path, is that we do lose focus. And I think so many of the problems that we fall into, and the false attachments that we build, have to do with this shift of focus. And so we start to, I think even one of the things that starts to happen, when you start to get into the deen, you start getting into religion, and then you sort of fall into sometimes some confusion where you don't know, like, well, should I listen to this scholar or that scholar, or this book or that book, or this website? And there's just so much information. And a lot of times people get overwhelmed, and they feel like there's so much confusion. You don't know which path to take, or which viewpoint is the right one. And I think that sometimes this is actually a consequence, even the confusion itself is a consequence of our own disconnect from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That, while we do need to seek out those experts, the scholars, and we need to be very careful about, where we're getting our knowledge, it can never replace that building that relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and cleaning the heart itself through tawbah. Because what happens is our sins create a veil, and that veil actually makes us confused. We're no longer able to see things as they really are. One of the most beautiful du'as to me is the one where we say, Allahumma arina al-haqqa haqqan warzuqna ittiba'ah wa arina al-batila batilan warzuqna ijtinaba. And what it means is, O Allah, allow us to see truth as truth and bless us with following it, and allow us to see falsehood as falsehood and bless us with refraining from it. So one of the consequences of a clean heart, and a heart that is, you clean it from the stain of sin, is that you are able to see through all of the different clutter. You're able to sort of start to see and understand truth as truth and falsehood as falsehood. Of course, with the guidance of those who, those people of knowledge. Inshallah, take a short break, and when we return, we'll continue on the topic of pitfalls on the path to God. Assalamu alaikum. This is Yasmin Mogahed, and you're listening to Serenity, streaming live on One Legacy Radio. We are speaking today about what are some of the pitfalls that come along the way on the path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, on the path to trying to make the deen a bigger part of our life and trying to make it our focus. One of the things that we spoke about in the last segment is that we sometimes get distracted. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made His creation very beautiful, we tend to sometimes get distracted by it, where the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whether it's in the example that I gave, whether it's these mountains, these amazing mountains, or a sunset, or it's people, whatever it is, that creation itself is actually intended to point us to our path, and not distract us from our path. And so if anything of the creation is actually distracting us from the path, then it's not, it's defeating the very purpose for which it was created, as a sign and a pointer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so, for example, even the mountains, and I gave this example that the mountains themselves on my path down this, from Big Bear, is that the mountains themselves are so breathtaking. I could get lost just in, looking at them and focusing on them. But if I did that while I was driving, I would crash. I have to stay focused on the road, even though I still see the mountains from the side, like the corner of my eye, or if I just glimpse at them, but I still have to stay focused on the road itself. Otherwise, my car will, hit another car, and I probably wouldn't survive. So the idea is that everything of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's creation, so whether it's other people in our lives or anything of the gifts of Allah, they should never be distracting us from Allah, but rather should be pointing us in the direction of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and helping us, enabling us in that path, and not the other way around. So this is something to keep in mind, that anytime we encounter, and these are pitfalls that will happen, anytime along this path you encounter something which distracts you from the path, whether it's because it's calling you to a different path. There are sometimes people that we encounter in our life who are not good influences on us. They might be, they have a bad effect on us, or they call us to do things which are displeasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's something that we want to avoid, because it's something that's taking us away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And sometimes it comes in a different form, where the way that it distracts us is more subtle, in that it happens because we become so in love with that thing, or we become so attached to that thing, and so it distracts us from the love and attachment to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in this, so the idea here is, even, if you use the example of marriage, for example, where marriage could be taken as two opposite extremes. One would be that this person in my life is actually, or just love in general, especially if the person they don't even get married. But this person in my life can either bring me to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, bring me closer to Allah, or this person can bring me farther away from Allah and distract me from Allah. And in this case, we want to be seeking those people in our lives which are bringing us closer to Allah. And in this case, when I'm driving, I could stop for a short amount of time, right? And if I'm stopping, and the purpose of my stopping, I'm looking at the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it makes me see, رَبَّنَا مَا خَلَقْتَ هَذَا بَاطِلًا سُبْحَانَكَ فَقِنَا عَذَابَ النَّارِ. This is the statement that the people, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, the ulil albab, that when they see the creation of Allah, they are brought, they're brought to this realization that you have not created all of this for no reason. You're high above that, so protect us from the punishment of hellfire. So this is like, using the creation again to bring you to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. One of the other pitfalls I think that we fall into when we start to seek this path is in the way that we conceive of God Himself. Sometimes we focus so much on this concept of, we want to do good deeds, and this is something which we're supposed to be doing, and supposed to be, we're called to do good deeds for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But one of the subtle pitfalls that happens is that we become we put our hope, or we put our dependency or our focus on the good deeds themselves. And what ends up happening sometimes is we start to view our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as almost like a transactional relationship, where, if I'm going into, for example, I'm going into a shop, I pay the money and the shopkeeper gives me the product, right? And we start to almost see the relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the same way, where we are paying, we give him our good deeds, and in exchange for our good deeds, he gives us, we want him to pay up, right? So we want things. So for example, I'm going to do lots of good deeds so that I can get, maybe stuff in this life. I want to get a nice car. I want to get a nice wife. I want to get a big house. So I do my good deeds so that I can get these things in dunya, right? It's this kind of this transactional relationship. And then, or even I'm doing my good deeds because I want Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give me other blessings. But obviously we want Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's blessings, and we need Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's blessings. But the problem with this type of idea is it starts to fall into the idea of it being like I'm deserving of it, like I've paid for it and now give me my product, as if it was a fair trade, and it obviously isn't. Inshallah, I'm going to take a quick break, and we'll explain this concept more when we return. Assalamu alaikum, this is Yasmin Mogahed, and you're listening to Serenity, streaming live on One Legacy Radio. We are speaking today about, once we do decide to take this path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what are some of the things that we might fall into, or what are some of the pitfalls on this path? And we began with the analogy, the story of my trip up the mountain and down the mountain, and just how beautiful it was, and the fact that I still had to stay focused on my path, because if I lost focus, and it was just very, for me, the reason it hit me so much is because it was really difficult to not look, for too long as I'm driving, because it's so beautiful. And actually, I'm going to have to post pictures just so people, in different places and around the world who haven't seen it can understand how beautiful this was. I'm not being dramatic. It really is very beautiful. So just so I can prove it to you, I'm going to post pictures, inshallah. But basically, you can see the pictures, inshallah, on my Facebook or on my website, ymogahedbookings.com. But basically, when we start to take this path, one of the other pitfalls is in how we view our relationship with Allah. And I was talking about this concept of a transactional relationship, where I'm paying you X amount of dollars and you're giving me a product which is, once I paid for it, I'm deserving of it, right? I'm entitled to get that. And if you don't give it to me in the exact form and, that I paid for, now I have the right to hold you accountable, right? Because you're going to call customer service and you're going to be upset because you paid and you didn't get the product. And we start to sort of hold Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in that same way, where, oh Allah, I'm doing this and this for you, why can't you come through for me? Why aren't you giving me all these things that I want? As if somehow we deserve all of these things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us, and because I want something, that I'm entitled to have it from Allah. And so it's a dangerous trap that we do fall into. We think that first of all, that anything that we have from Him is in any way we're entitled to have it, or that we deserve to have it. And this is absolutely untrue. Everything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us is a gift. Everything, our eyesight, our hearing, the fact that we're able to breathe and think and have food and water, and the greatest gift that He has given us is the fact that we know Him, the fact that we can worship Him. And these are things that we can never, ever pay Him for. These are gifts which there's no amount of money, there's no amount of good deeds could ever repay for this gift. So we need to really break out of the idea that, we paid, and so, like, give us our stuff, right? We need to really understand and get back to the concept of gratitude and how much Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us and how much we could never ever repay it, right? And it's not a transactional relationship by any means. How could it possibly be transactional when even just your eyesight alone is something priceless? Like, you can never pay for it, right? No amount of good deeds could pay for it. Similarly, or actually more so, is if you think about the concept of Jannah, because we know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that if we live our life a certain way, and by the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we will be entered into Jannah, inshallah. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for that life. That life is unending. That life is infinite. And it's in fact perfect. So it's infinite on two different levels, in quality and in quantity. So the quality, it's perfect, in that there's no sadness, there's no fear, there's no pain, there's no disappointment. None of those things that we have that plague us in this dunya are in that life. We don't have to deal with any of that. Similarly, it's perfect in terms of it's lasting, and so it's greater in terms of quantity as well. Khayrun wa abqa. Abqa meaning that it's longer lasting. And so this is something infinite. And what am I doing to get this? Well, I'm doing something no matter how holy I am, no matter how righteous I am, right? And even if I spend my entire life and I never sleep, if that was even possible, and I only worshipped Allah, it's still a limited amount of time, right? Even if I lived 100 years and all I did was worship Allah, even if I lived 500 years or 900 years, like Nuh alayhi salam, and all I did was worship Allah, would something finite pay for something infinite? It doesn't, right? So it's not a fair transaction. And the reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is willing to do this for us is because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, and Al-Wahhab, the one who loves to give gifts, and Al-Karim, the most generous. These are the attributes of Allah that we need to understand and know, that we're not dealing with, somebody like a drill sergeant or a police officer, a'udhu billah, who's just like ready to punish you or ready to withhold. That's not who we're dealing with. Because here's the problem. When you think of this relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as like a fair trade and a transactional relationship, I'm doing my work and He's paying me back in exchange for that work. The problem with that is then we have two problems. One is it creates in us a sense of entitlement and arrogance, and we almost start to argue with Allah when He doesn't do what we want Him to do, as if, a'udhu billah, Allah is working for us, a'udhu billah, as if I'm paying and He didn't give back He didn't give me my product. And that's one serious problem. But there's another problem which is even more subtle, and that's what happens when we are not able to live up to what we consider is the payment, which is the good deeds. So when we're not able to live up to these good deeds and we fall short, and this is inevitable at some point, right, where we fall or we slip, because we are human, we're not angels. And human beings, we know, will always make mistakes. We are told this again and again. And so when that does happen, the one who sees Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as the a'udhu billah, the drill sergeant, the one who, you give me, I only give you back what you deserve. The one who sees Allah in that way, the one who sees that relationship as transactional, will now lose hope, will now fall, and will feel like there's no hope now for me. And that's why sometimes when we do take this path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we get to points in our life when we fall short in our deeds, and then we start to lose hope in Allah. And this is a sign that we aren't really understanding who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in terms of, and in terms of the relationship that we have with him, where we never deserved the things he was giving us to begin with. And it was always Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy that we were even able to worship him, right? And we were even able to get all of these things that we had, or even the spiritual gifts that we had. It wasn't because of my deeds. It wasn't like I was paying, full price or something, I'm paying like nothing. and I'm getting, sorry, why are you laughing? I'm paying nothing and I'm getting something infinite. I mean, when you think about it, it doesn't even fit in your brain, So the idea here is that when I do fall short and I'm not able to live up to the way that I should be, for example, we shouldn't lose hope, because the idea here is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was always giving us out of his generosity and mercy anyways. And so how can we now lose hope in his generosity and his mercy? It's still there. It's the same generosity and the same mercy that he gave us when we were worshiping him. And so we continue. Now, what does this mean? We continue to strive to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we do it because, we hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that he'll accept from us. And we know that this is the absolute least that we can do for Allah, given everything that he gives us, right? It's not an equal trade, but it's the least we can do. And when you look at the beautiful example of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when one time he was praying so long that it was like hurting his feet, and Aisha radiallahu anha asked him, like, why are you doing this, to yourself? He was praying so long that it was hurting his feet, it was hurting him. And she said, why are you doing this if all of your sins are already forgiven? And his answer was, should I not be a grateful servant? So he was, his worship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was out of gratitude for everything that Allah had given him. It was like, it's this concept of it's the least I can do, it's not because I need to pay in order to get, my product, but rather Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving me every single minute that I'm alive. He's giving and he's giving and he's giving. And so I'd feel ashamed to not at least try, to give something, to do something. But the danger again is thinking that I'm giving enough, or thinking that I'm giving and therefore that's why I deserve to receive. Because I don't deserve to receive. I receive only because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy and gratitude. And I want to really stress this, because I think it completely changes the way that we see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the way that we respond when we mess up. It's so important, because one of the things that shaitan will use against us on this path is when you mess up, he'll come and tell you things like, you know what, you did X, Y, and Z. Who do you think you are? You're going to go pray now? Like you're such a hypocrite, And this type of, where he makes us feel so ashamed. And again, we should feel a sense of remorse, of course, and shame when we disobey Allah. This is absolutely true. And in fact, it's one of the requirements for tawbah. But I'm talking about hopelessness. I'm talking about loss of hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where shaitan he actually wants to use your remorse against you to paralyze you so that you don't try anymore. And he says, who are you to go pray now after you've sinned, after you've, committed this or that thing that you've done, you're going to go pray. And that's exactly what you need to do at that point. Once you've sinned, that's, all the more reason why you should go pray. And part of the problem too is that we view Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala like we view human beings in a way. Because when you disobey your mom, or you disobey your dad, or you hurt a friend because they asked you to do something and you didn't follow through, are you gonna call them up or run and try to engage them? No, what you're gonna try to do is actually hide from them. You're gonna try to avoid them. So whenever say you feel really bad about hurting a friend or letting a friend down, or disobeying your parents, you're going to try to avoid your parents or that friend that you hurt. And this is kind of because human nature is when somebody hurts you, you feel like they're going to be really angry at you and they're not going to forgive you, or, they're going to hold you accountable for what you did. And so we start to apply that same rule with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. that we did something wrong, so now we should avoid him. Right? Isn't that what we do? We try to avoid Allah. So we feel really bad because we committed a lot of sins, or we're not living a very good life. And so what we do is we try to avoid for example, other religious people. We might want to, some people might not like to hang out with hijabis or people who go to the masjid. And you try to avoid these people because it's inside of you feel like, I don't know, sometimes it's like you feel like maybe you're being a hypocrite, or you feel like you just want to, because you have done something that you don't feel good about, you try to just avoid any reminder of that. And similarly, we avoid going to Allah Himself. We will avoid salah, for example. We'll avoid going and praying when we've committed a sin. And this is exactly what we don't want to do. Because when we've committed a sin, that's when we need to run to Allah more. So it's the opposite of a human being, right? When you hurt a human being, you disappoint a human being, you try to avoid them. But in the case of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when we have done something to displease Allah, that's when we actually need to run to Allah more. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not like a human being. Allah forgives. His forgiveness and his forbearance and his generosity is infinite. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants you to come to Him. When you have sinned, He wants you to return to Him. And this is the whole concept of tawbah. Tawbah is something which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves His servants to do. So, again, thinking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, realizing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not like a human being, and that, sometimes when we fall into these wrong concepts of Allah and this wrong concept of our relationship, it leads to two problems, and almost two extreme problems. One, on the one hand, is arrogance. When we feel like we are doing good, we start to feel proud of ourselves. And the reason we feel proud of ourselves, of course, we're going to feel happy when we're worshiping Allah, and that's natural. But I'm talking about arrogance. I'm talking about pride. I'm talking about thinking that I'm worshiping Allah because I'm really great, and then we start to look down on other people, thinking that, this sort of self-righteousness. And that's a problem of thinking I paid for this product and that's why I get it. It's from me. It's from that concept of, entitlement, and I deserve what I have because I worked hard. You can work as hard as you want. You do not deserve just the eyesight that you have. You do not deserve the fact that you're able to stand up and pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You don't deserve that. That was a gift. That was a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we should never feel entitled to these things. And therefore, even if Allah takes them away from us, we shouldn't feel, that anger as if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how could you take something that belonged to me? None of these things belong to us. Our eyesight, our hearing, our health, our beauty, our children, our spouses, our own health. All of these things that we have, they don't belong to us. They're gifts that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us. And if we're able to use those gifts for the sake of Allah, this is in and of itself a huge gift that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us. So inshallah, we'll end there. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم إنه غفور رحيم سبحانك الله وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.